What's up, Spell Slingers? This is Nicky G. Welcome back to another Deck Tech with Better Commander. Want to meet a dragon with severe childhood trauma and identity issues? Well, we're going to talk about a dragon toolbox commander with strong Reanimator overtones, Scion of the Dragon. Scion, a young shoot or twig of a plant, especially one cut for grafting or rooting. This guy kind of looks like a twig and he's shooting lasers, so this makes sense. This art is a little weird. It looks like he has a giant head, but I think it's the perspective. He is also breathing laser breath instead of fire, but I'm sure there's some good reason for that. Scion of the Dragon cost Wooburg for a legendary 4/4 avatar with flying. So far so good. 2 colorless mana. Search your library for a dragon permanent card and put it into your graveyard. If you do, Scion of the Dragon becomes a copy of that card until end of turn, then shuffle. Note that you can activate this ability at instant speed in response to itself, so you can stack 2 or more dragons in the yard. The activations will resolve in reverse order, so he'll end up a copy of the first targeted dragon. This is useful if you have a Reanimator spell you want to resolve to pull one of those out later. For example, you can activate Puludvara Hellkite, activate in response to pull the Big Daddy Dragon, then reanimate the Dragon for Dragon Wagon Value Town. This commander is a graveyard tutor on a big booty body. I built this deck leaning on dragon synergies with a hefty creature base. There are 26 creatures in the deck with 15 sources of mana acceleration. I put in a dozen recursion spells and graveyard enablers. There's lots of card draw that triggers on our creatures entering the battlefield and or creature casts. This is a slow ramping but explosive deck that fields threat after threat and fills the sky with dragons. Our dragons serve a variety of roles and generally kick tail. Alright, let's talk little ramp. We have color fixers like Elysian Caryatid that will almost always tap for 2 mana. Birds of Paradise and our old pal Sakura Tribe Elder. This dude has died in so many commander games he's going to get a complex. I'm a big fan of Fertile Ground. Fertile Ground's going to fix our mana. And the little guy with the feast on his head is Dragon Lord's Servant, and he reduces the cost of dragons. Dragon's Horde is a really cool card in this deck. It fixes our colors and can draw us cards in the late game. This is the first of many dragon-specific cards. I also included some late-game, mid-game mana accelerators. Savage Ventmaw will more often than not net us an extra spell, and Ramos can get us Progenitus mana relatively quickly to help us ramp into another big threat. Sarkhan Unbroken draws us cards and adds little drips of mana. This guy is a flavorful include. I have one. I think it's an awesome card. Our opponents will concentrate on him because they don't want us to ultimate, which will maybe buy us a little breathing room and give us an extra couple life. It'll let us power out our other threats as well. Firemind's Vessel is great at color fixing. I don't think there's another card like it. There are certainly things that are more efficient, but it's got a dragon in the art, so whatever. This deck has a very strong Reanimator theme enabled by our commander. I included a few cards to enable Reanimator strategies and one bigger Reanimation spell. It's much easier to get our big dragons out of the graveyard than it is to cast them, so I slotted in Gerard's Orders, Buried Alive, and Entomb. Some of our Reanimator spells are creatures, so I procured an Eladamri's Call for this deck as well. Patriarch's Bidding made its way in there too. This is a great card. We're putting a lot of dragons into the graveyard, so getting them all out at once can be game over if Dragon Tempest is on the battlefield. I think in general, Reanimator creatures are a little underrated. Phyrexian Delver, Karmic Guide, and Doomed Necromancer are dudes helping dudes return from the grave. I like Bladewing the Risen. You can search him to the graveyard with Scion, then get him out with one of the Reanimator spells. You can kind of 2 for 1. He enters the battlefield and brings a dragon buddy out of the graveyard for a little double dragon action. Nethroi, Apex of Death, is a really cute card out of Ikoria, but he can bring a lot of heat to this deck. 7 mana and he can mutate onto something and help us recover quickly after a board wipe. The Mimeoplasm is another card that can get really huge. If he comes in as a copy of a Hasty Dragon, he can deliver big surprise damage. Teneb the Harvester looks like a little sad old man dragon, but he can also pay 2 and a black on damage to get a creature out of the yard. Plus, he's a dragon. Oh, look at this cool player rewards copy of Zombify. It's a really cool looking card. It's pretty basic. 4 mana to bring a card out of the yard. Unburial Rites has Flashback, which my opponents always seem to forget about. Persist and Animate Dead are cheap Reanimator spells to round out our recursion spells for this deck. You definitely don't want your hand to be empty, so I included some draw options that we can cast in the early game. Monastery Siege lets us loot, which helps fill our graveyard. Garruk's Uprising and Elemental Bond trigger on our dragons entering the battlefield, but also on any dragon tokens that get created, which can be incredibly useful. Temur Ascendancy is so good in this deck. It also triggers on tokens and gives our dragons haste. Dragon Mage is a big, smart dragon that wheels everybody. Guardian Project is great in any creature-based deck. It doesn't trigger on tokens, but anything brought out of the yard will net us a draw. I have a few dragon-specific enchantments that are fabulous for us. Dragon Tempest is a alternate win condition in this deck on its own, especially with Udvara Hellkite. Crucible of Fire pumps our dragons a lot, and Frontier Siege can either act as board control or ramp. Fighting can be really good for us when our deck is filled with giant flying monsters. Speaking of which, let's get to the dragons. Some are just too good not to play. Skyline Despot introduces the Monarch and draws us a card at the very least. Steel Hellkite has been a commander staple and the bane of token decks for a long time. We can pay 0 into the activated ability on damage, and 43 zombie tokens across the table just vanish. Hellkite Tyrant is just a good card. Helps us ramp or just annihilates the artifact deck. If we need to hit hard and fast, we have Tyrant's Familiar and Hellkite Charger, 2 hasty dragons to surprise our foes. There are times when Scion has been removed and we want him swinging the turn he's cast. Hellkite Charger has great synergy with Savage Ventmaw. We can get as many extra combats as we have unspent mana. Atarka World Render, printed so much it's down to 20 cents, amps our damage and can be a big finisher. Our 3 key dragons are going to be Udvara Hellkite, who we want when we have a board ready to swing in. The Dragon, whose triggered ability is likely to get us at least a few cards, not to mention pop something into play. Lastly, Balefire Dragon can be a mini board wipe for a problematic opponent. This deck is a lot of fun to play and can be built on a budget. Scion can consistently tutor out our best dragons. This list plays very slow in the early game. We're doing a lot of ramping and putting out value enchantments, and then becomes very explosive when we're putting a lot of dragons onto the field. Everything is a threat, so a lot of removal comes our way. It's very resilient though. I mean, if something goes to the yard, a lot of times we can reanimate it very easily. Sometimes I see Phyrexian Delver get countered only for a follow-up cast of Animate Dead to render the counter pointless. These types of things happen a lot with this deck. As long as we're drawing cards, we can keep the threats coming. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. I'm going to link the deck list into the description, and this is a Battle Cruiser deck. It's not going to win any CEDH tournaments, but it hits the sweet spot where it can sit at a lower or higher power table. Listen, pop that like button right in the mouth and subscribe for more nonsense. This is going to be Nicky G signing off.